أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We continue our analysis of the wasiyah of the Prophet to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Now, just as a quick recap, for those of you who might have missed some of the sessions, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi addresses Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, giving him practical advice on spiritual development. Ya Ali, usika fi nafsika bi khisalin. O Ali, I advise you with respect to your soul to acquire certain traits of character. Fahfadha anni. These characteristics, these qualities are so important that the Prophet says that I want you to memorize them. I want you to preserve them. Always keep them in mind. And then the Prophet says, Allahumma a'inhu, O Allah, help Ali acquire these traits. We mentioned the lessons that we can learn from these expressions. Spirituality, spiritual development requires effort, but it also requires tawfiq. It requires effort on your end, and it also requires Allah's help. You have to seek Allah's help when you want to better yourself. The first piece of advice that the Prophet ﷺ gave, he says what? I'm going to start auctioning off handbags. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I don't see any Louis Vuitton bags, so it's not going to be worth it. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, Al-Ula, the first is as-sidq. Honesty, truthfulness. وَلَا يَخْرُجَنَّ مِنْ فِيكَ كِذْبَةٌ أَبَدًا. Don't allow a single lie to come out of your mouth. Truthfulness. If you're not truthful, you don't have iman. Because faith, in essence, is what? It's submission to the truth. Faith revolves around haqq, acknowledging haqq, submitting to haqq, supporting haqq, preserving haqq. If you lie, you're not part of this process. If you lie, you're doing something that is antithetical to the very essence of faith. So don't speak any lies. Because even if you start to tell small lies, oh, it's not a big deal, it's a white lie, those small lies, they evolve into big lies. And avoiding lies is only one aspect of this character trait. Because to be truthful, in essence, means that you are at the service of the truth. And just because something is true, it doesn't mean that it needs to be said. Your mission, your attitude is that I will uphold haqq. First and foremost, by not speaking falsehood. But I will also uphold haqq, even if it means that I remain silent. Just because something is true, it doesn't mean that it has to be said. We discussed all of this. I'm just giving a quick review. The second was what? Does anyone remember? What was the second? Al-wara'. Ahsant. Wara' means to be extra cautious with regards to your soul. Because everything else is dispensable. Everything else is perishable. Everything else about you is temporary. Especially your body. The body that you have today is the skin that's on your body today. It's not the same skin that was 7 years ago. The body that you have is literally not the same body that you have today. So does that mean that you're not the same person? There's still the I that is inside of you. So you got to be very cautious with respect to your soul. This soul is very valuable. This ruh is very valuable. It's so valuable that when Allah blew the ruh into Adam, He commanded the angels to prostrate. The body was there. When it was only the body, there's no command for sajda. فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ, when I fashion him. So the body's there, he's been fashioned. But the command for the angels to prostrate and acknowledge the great potential of Adam comes when? When the ruh is blown into him. فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. So you have the soul. In fact, you don't have it. You are a soul. You have a body. Some people, they don't make that distinction. They think that, I have a soul. No, you don't have you have a car. You have clothes. You have a house. These are possessions. Your body is just one of them. You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You're not just someone who has, when people speak about spirituality, they say things like, I had a very spiritual experience. No, the reality is in life, you're a soul, you're a spirit that is having a physical experience. In this life, you're just having a physical experience. Because your essence is what? The soul. So you have this precious thing called the nafs. Now obviously you don't want to damage it. So step one, you probably should avoid the major sins. What are the major sins? The kaba'ir are those sins mentioned in the Quran whereby Allah has threatened with punishment. Avoid those. That's the least that you could do. Don't do that much damage to your soul. Now, if you recognize the real value of the human soul, you're going to say, not only am I going to avoid the kaba'ir, I'm going to avoid all sin. Because every sin is actually a form of self-destruction. You're harming yourself. Even if you feel fine, right? You might say that I'm listening to music, I'm eating, a pepperoni pizza, it's haram, I feel fine, it was really good. Just because it feels good and you don't feel the immediate harm, it doesn't mean that it's good for you. I think we know that by now, right? There are some drugs that I'm sure feel amazing. But is it good for you? Of course not. Avoid the major sins. Avoid all sins. There are some people who have so much respect for their souls that it's not even enough to avoid sin. They say, I'm even going to avoid overindulging in halal things. Don't overdo it. Is it haram to eat 5 burgers for iftar? No, it's not. It's not haram. Right? But is it a good idea? I've seen some brothers eat like 5 burgers for iftar, so this is a true story. Don't overindulge in halal. Take what you need. Instead of overloading and constantly feeding, your body has limits. But you know what doesn't have limits? Your soul. Feed that. Feed the thing that's going to be eternal. That's why Allah, when He speaks about dhikr, He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu dhkuru Allah dhikran kathira. Remember Allah abundantly. Allah didn't say eat abundantly. Because the body has limits, but the soul has unlimited potential. So don't overindulge, even in the halal. So that was what we were discussing for the past 2 nights. Are you guys ready for the third? Are the sisters ready? Are their sisters going to upset me tonight? Right. They probably are, but I'm forgiving. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Number 3. So remember, who's speaking? The Prophet. Who is he speaking to? Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. So this is a pretty serious conversation. Agreed? وَالثَّالِثَةُ, the third piece of advice, الْخَوْفُ مِنَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ ذِكْرُهُ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. Fear God. Fear Allah as if you see Him. Fear Allah as if you see Him. Now the Prophet understands that many people will go through life not feeling the presence of God at a level whereby they see God in everything. Try, what you should strive for is to get to a level where it's as if you can see God. Now God is not a body, but you should feel His presence. You know, the fear of Allah is a virtue, but what makes it unique is that if you have the fear of God in your heart, it actually gives rise to other virtues. If you are a God-fearing person, that fear of Allah is going to produce other positive qualities. If you fear Allah, you're probably going to be very humble. If you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're probably going to be truthful. If you fear Allah, you're probably going to be generous. So you see, this one quality actually becomes an agent that creates and gives rise to other qualities. Now the problem is, most people are using their phones while Sheikh Azhar is speaking. Everybody's like, oh God, the Sheikh is looking at me. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight, I think. Most people, they're not at a level where they see God. Why? Because they commit so much haram that they have blinders on. So many veils. There's a very beautiful hadith from Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi. Allahumma salli alayhi. Where he says, خَفِ اللَّهِ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. Fear Allah as if you see Him. As if you see Him. And then the Imam says, وَإِن كُنْتَ لَا تَرَى. But if you don't see God, and what a sad life to go through life and you never see God in the world around you. If you don't see Allah, then at least know that He sees you. At least know that He sees you. وَإِن كُنْتَ تَرَى أَنَّهُ لَا يَرَاكَ. If you think that Allah cannot see you, فَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ. Then you've disbelieved. If someone doesn't believe that Allah sees them, then they don't believe in God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see you. If you don't believe that, that means you're not even a believer. وَإِن كُنْتَ تَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. But if you do really believe that He sees you, ثُمَّ بَرَزْتَ لَهُ بِالْمَعْصِيَةِ, but yet you still disobey Him, فَقَدْ جَعَلْتَهُ مِنْ أَهْوَنِ النَّاظِرِينَ إِلَيْكَ. If you know that Allah sees you, and we all know, and yet you still commit that sin, that means that you've made Allah the most insignificant observer. If you're driving on the freeway, and let's say you're speeding, you're being a bad boy, you're speeding 30 miles over speed limit. Or if you're a sister, you got a new Tesla and you're like, let me see how fast I can go. You're driving fast. Now when do you slow down? If you see the cops. Why do you slow down when you recognize that a cop is seeing you? Because you know they have power. They have authority. They can punish you. They can give you a ticket. They have authority. Why don't you slow down when you see a horse? Why don't you slow down? They're living beings too. They can see. Why don't you slow down when you see a school teacher on the side of the road? Why don't you slow down when you're driving? There's a mosquito. The mosquito can see me. Why don't I slow down for the mosquito? Because the horse, the mosquito, the school teacher, whoever else you can think of, they are insignificant observers. They don't matter. They don't have the power to do anything. When you commit haram, when you sin, and you know that Allah sees you, what does that essentially mean? It means that Allah, you're not as significant. You're an insignificant observer. Now, we human beings, when we truly feel that we are being watched, when we really feel that we are in the presence of another being, we conduct ourselves with a little bit of formality. When you're all alone and there's no one around, you're pretty relaxed about your behavior. You're relaxed, when it comes to your appearance. Some of you guys are relaxed even when you come to the masjid, right? Roll out of bed, afro, I don't care. But generally, when you know that you're going to be around other beings, you're going to comb your hair, you're going to, maybe sit up a little bit more upright. Why? Because you're going to put on the cologne, you're going to brush your teeth, right? Please brush your teeth in this month. It's haram to harm others. So, I almost knocked this thing over. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we give special consideration to those who we perceive as being in our presence. Now, when a mu'min, when a human being truly recognizes that they are in the presence of Allah, that should have an effect on the way that you conduct yourself, even in private, especially in private. Now, for the average mu'min, at the very least, if you know that Allah observes you, at the very least, that should mean that you do your wajibat and you avoid the muharramat. That's at the very least. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most significant observer. You got to fulfill the obligations, avoid the muharramat. Now there are some who say that that's not enough. See, as your spirituality develops, you realize it's not enough for me just to do the wajib and avoid the haram. Because when I recognize that I'm in the presence of Allah, that means that nothing else deserves my full attention other than Him. Imagine you invite someone very important, a very prestigious person. They're sitting in your living room. It's not enough for you just to get them water and not do anything that offends them. If you really want to honor them and show them the respect that they deserve, what do? You give them your full undivided attention. Because that is the way that you honor the presence of that important being. And that's what you do for a human being. An important human being. You give them, you offer them everything they want. You avoid doing anything that upsets them, and you give them your full undivided attention. That's why Ahlul Bayt, they're always asking for istighfar. Because when they're in this world, they have to interact with others, and they're not able to give their full undivided attention the way that they do when they're praying. You see? We're talking about a different level here. Is there a higher level of God consciousness? Yes, there is. And that is that there are some who are so aware of the presence of Allah that they reach a point where they don't even see themselves anymore. It's not that they recognize that there are other things, but I'm going to give Allah my full attention. No. They feel as if there's nothing but Him. I don't even exist. And that's why when you look at prophets, imams, when they sacrifice, they don't give themselves credit. Because they see that it's all Allah. They don't even see themselves. And this is what's called al-fana'u fillah. They're annihilated. They're dissolved in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we use the word fear Allah. You have to fear Allah. Now you might wonder, why do I have to fear Allah? Right? I'm afraid of robbers. I'm afraid of thieves. I'm afraid of spiders. Some brothers are afraid of spiders too, let's be fair. Why should I fear Allah? Especially if Allah is always introducing Himself as the most merciful, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. So isn't this a contradiction? Why should I fear such a loving, compassionate, merciful Creator? The answer is that in any relationship of love, there is always fear. You can't have real love unless you also have fear. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. A baby loves its mother because the mother is everything. Pure love. What happens if a little child wanders off and gets lost and can't find its mother? It cries. So the child loves its mother, but also there's an element of fear. When you love something so much, you're afraid to lose it. So in essence, when we speak about fear of Allah, what we're really speaking about is doing anything that takes us away from the source of all love. That's why in Dua Kumail, what do we read? Very powerful line from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, Ilahi sabartu ala adhabik. I can endure the punishment of hell. فَكَيْفَ أَصْبِرُ عَلَى فِرَاقِكَ. But how can I endure separation from you? How can we endure that? So the Prophet says the third is that you have to fear Allah as if you see Him. And we also should fear the consequences of our actions. There's a very beautiful narration from Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi. He says, Al-mu'min bayna makhafatayn. That the believer sort of oscillates between two fears. What are they? He says, ذنب قد مضى لا يدري ما صنع الله فيه. The believer is afraid of the consequences of those sins that they committed in the past. You know, many of us, if you really think about it, if you think about the moment that you became baligh, you became religiously accountable before Allah. Think about how many sins you've committed. We've made a lot of mistakes. In fact, we can't even remember many of the sins that we've committed, let alone ask Allah to forgive us. So the mu'min is worried about, maybe I've committed certain sins that I never asked Allah to forgive me for. And I'm worried that maybe the consequence of that sin has yet to reach me. You know, some of us are going through difficulties now that might, we don't know for sure, they might be related to a sin that you committed a decade ago. Because the effects of our sins, sometimes they don't surface immediately. You see them you see them years later, decades later. So the mu'min is always afraid, you know, Allah forgive me. That's why we should always pray, oh Allah forgive me for this sin, that sin. And forgive me especially for the sins that I cannot recall. That's real istighfar. The way that you and I do istighfar, come on, it's a joke. Astaghfirullah, 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 astaghfirullah. That's not istighfar, right? Because it's just empty words. Real istighfar, you know what it is? Is one day to sit on your musalla, just you and Allah, and really think. Go back to your high school days, right? When you thought you were Eminem. Or go back to those days and start writing down the sins that you committed. And ask Allah one by one, oh Allah, forgive me for this. Like let the remorse wash over. Feel the guilt. You know, people talk about, people need to feel a little bit of guilt. Let that wash over. So that's the first. So the mu'min is between two fears. The fear of those sins that we committed in the past, and we don't know if the consequences have caught up with us or not. Number two, وَعُمْرٌ قَدْ بَقِيَ لَا يَدْرِي مَا يَكْتَسِبُ فِيهِ مِنَ الْمَهَالِكِ. The mu'min is also worried that, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Am I going to fall into certain sins that will literally destroy me? So don't only ask Allah to lengthen your life. Ask Allah to lengthen your life as long as your life will be a life of piety. Because it's very easy to slip. There are some people, they're on the straight path, and then later on in life, Allah tests them with something. Tests them with wealth. Some of us are being tested with wealth. Others are being tested with beauty. Yes. The looks that you have, it's not from you. Allah gave you that beauty. What are you going to do with it? You know, as Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, everything has a zakat. Everything has a divine tax. When Allah gives you a gift, there's a tax. The zakat of knowledge is what? To teach. The zakat of power is what? To be just. The zakat of beauty is modesty. Make sure you pay your zakat. All forms. Now, we don't want to reach a point where we are so afraid of God that we're paralyzed. You know, one of the beautiful things about Islam is that it is a religion of balance. It's a sin to think that Allah will never forgive you. Yes. But it's also a sin to think that Allah will never punish you. Those are two extremes. That's why Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. He says, "Urju Allah raja'an la yujarri'uka ala ma'asi." Have hope in Allah. Have so much hope in Allah, but not to the extent that you're emboldened to disobey. Don't say, you know, Allah is Arham ar-Rahimeen. Habibi, bring it out. Bring out the vodka. Let's go to the clubs. Allah is Arham ar-Rahimeen. No, the Imam says, no, this is, have hope in Allah, but not to the extent that it emboldens you to commit haram. And then the Imam says, وَخَفِ اللَّهِ خَوْفًا لَا يُؤْيِسُكَ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ. But fear Allah, but not so much that you lose hope in His mercy. The mu'min has to be between these two extremes, the extreme of hope and the extreme of fear. You got to be balanced. Number 4, and I'll conclude with this. So quick review. The Prophet said the first piece of advice was related to truthfulness. The second was, oh, come on, you guys are going to make me cry. The second one was what? Extra careful. What's the Arabic word? Wara. Wara. Ahsant. Good job. Now, what was the third one? We just talked about the third one. What's the third one? Fear of Allah. Now, what's the fourth one? وَالرَّابِعَةُ كَثْرَةُ الْبُكَاءِ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. The fourth is to shed tears out of reverence for Allah. You know, sometimes I see people, when they receive a gift, right, from a loved one. You know, I've seen husbands, they get like a diamond ring, a necklace, and the fiancé or the wife, right, starts crying, right? For the brothers, you buy him like season tickets to the Lakers, he's going to start crying, right? The Prophet says, and this is why, because it's gratitude, right? These are tears of joy, these are tears of gratitude. Everything that you have in your life is from Allah. It comes to you directly sometimes it comes through people, it's all from Allah. So if you want to cry tears of joy and gratitude, cry it when you speak to Him, it's all from Him. Now, here the Prophet mentions a reward for a single teardrop, and try to shed one teardrop out of the love for Allah in this month. What's the reward? يُبْنَى لَكَ بِكُلِّ دَمْعَةٍ أَلْفَ بَيْتٍ فِي الْجَنَّةِ. For every teardrop, Allah will build, He will build 1,000 homes for you in Jannah. Now you might say, man, that's pretty extra. That's a bit excessive. 1,000 homes? Sheikh, I don't even have one home in dunya. Can't afford it. Can't even rent it. 1,000 homes? You know, sometimes when you read a hadith like this, you're like, come on, this has to be an exaggeration. 1,000 homes? The reason why we think that these rewards are exaggeratory, they're exaggerations, is because we don't understand the power and the value of tears that are shed for spiritual reasons. Because you don't understand the malakuti dimension of a tear that is shed out of reverence for Allah, you think that it's too much. Because you don't understand the spiritual world. I'll give you an example. Now, before I give you the example, actually, let me read this hadith for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Are you guys still breathing? Are you guys still good? Can I have your undivided attention for maybe 3 more minutes? Good? Sisters? I have to ask the sisters because all the noise is coming from this side. Right. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam al-Sadiq says, مَا مِن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا وَلَهُ كِيلٌ وَوَزْنٌ. There is nothing in this world except that it can be weighed, it can be measured. We can assign some type of value to it. إِلَّا الدُّمُوعِ. Except tears. Tears that are shed out of khashiyah, out of awe for Allah. فَإِنَّ الْقَطْرَةَ تُطْفِئُ بِحَارًا مِّن نَارٍ. Because those tears that we shed, you know, it's in the middle of the night, you're praying, you're reading dua, and you have that moment of wakefulness, that moment of presence, and you shed the tear. The Imam says those tears have the power to extinguish Jahannam, oceans of Jahannam. وَلَوْ أَنَّ بَاكِيًا بَكَى فِي أُمَّةٍ لَرُحِمُوا. The Imam says sometimes Allah has mercy on an entire nation because one person from among them shed a tear out of their love for Allah. So people who have this type of relationship with Allah, they're the best insurance. You know, we talk about insurance. These people are the best insurance for our communities. People who have this deep relationship with Allah. Now again, going back to the 1,000 homes, you might be thinking that's too much. For you and I, it's too much. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His generosity is unlimited. And also, sometimes we forget that the hereafter is eternal. That means that there's always going to be something new to discover. You will never exhaust the blessings of Allah. But more importantly, because we don't understand the value. If you don't understand the power that is generated by the sun, the star that is the reason why life exists on earth. If you don't understand the power that is produced by that star, you're going to think the following fact is an exaggeration. You know, if the hottest part of the sun is the core, right? If you take one drop, one little tiny drop from the core of the sun, and you put it on the surface of the earth, no living thing could survive for 150 kilometer radius. Everything within 150 kilometers will die, even bacteria. Now you might think that's an exaggeration. No, it's not an exaggeration. You just don't know the power of the sun. The Prophet is saying that look at the power of the tears. Look at how much this tear, how much value it has. So in this month, my dear brothers and sisters, when we recite these du'as, instead of just, flipping the pages or scrolling down to see how much is left, take a moment. Really reflect on what you're reciting, because one of the greatest achievements in this month is to shed that tear out of your love and out of your reverence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That brings our discussion to an end for tonight. Inshallah, we'll continue the hadith in the subsequent nights. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.